Now on the Regeneration Show.
We're learning healthy personal boundaries around communication with Shaman John Moore.
If I wouldn't allow a stranger to talk to me in a certain way, I'm not going to let somebody who is supposedly a loved one talk to me in that way.
Your itinerary is being regenerated. Please turn right. Turn left. Turn right. Regenerating. Please take a 180-degree turn. Please take another 180-degree turn. Going forward, wake up 15 minutes sooner. Keep up with world events. Determine your retirement spending needs. You are going in the wrong direction. Try paleo. Regenerating. Conserve your water. Lower your resting heart rate. Please turn around. You might have left your oven on. You have reached your destination. The Regeneration Show with Andrew St. Germain and Stephanie Katona.
Hello and welcome back to the Regeneration Show. I'm Andrew St. Germain in Toronto, Ontario.
And I'm Stephanie Katona in Mexico City, Mexico.
So you moved?
I didn't technically move. I traveled. So I think we all were under the assumption that I moved to LA because I got comfortable there for 2 months. So everyone just assumed I moved and I'm not leaving.
Because you were really loving LA.
I was. I feel like that's me though. I'm like, ooh, I love LA. I'm obsessed with it. Now I came to Mexico. I'm like, ooh, I really like it here too. I can see myself living here too. Then I'm going to go to Spain and be like, I really like it here too. I could settle here.
But you're here for the next little while.
Yeah, I'm going to commit to staying here for 2 months because as you know, I reunited with my brother because he actually decided to set up shop here.
Okay. And is he going to stay for just a couple more months or is he there for the longer haul?
He wants to stay here for a year.
Oh, cool.
So I figured, why not visit for a couple months? He literally has a social life embedded for me here. I got here. We've been out like every night of the week with all these people. So it's been good.
What's Mexico City social life?
So the cool thing, so I'm going to say the difference between LA and Mexico City is that here it's easier to meet people. There's a lot of foreigners and there's a lot of meetup groups and the city's a lot smaller and walkable. So you walk down the street, there's a coffee shop, there's a restaurant. LA is very, very spread out. And maybe I met friends because I'm extroverted and social and just would talk to everyone at boxing or wherever. But here there's all these meetups. So you just meet people from the States, from Canada, from Europe. They just host these like dinners and crypto meetups and salsa dancing nights. So we just meet people.
Are you going to do salsa dance lessons?
This weekend, baby.
Oh, really?
We're going to Mamba Rumba. We're going to be like, it's a salsa dance club. So we're going to have some people over and then we're going to go salsa dancing.
That's fun.
So yeah, reunited with my brother. And it's nice to see him. I did miss him because we were supposed to travel together initially, but due to unforeseen circumstances,
there's a lot of those this year. There's a lot of unforeseen circumstances. I was supposed to go to Disney World, but that was canceled due to unforeseen circumstances.
I do remember how upset you were about not being able to go to Florida. I remember we were training and then as it was like the second time we were training, you were supposed to go to Florida and then everything shut down.
I was training to go to Florida.
I remember you started 2 weeks before. You're like, I have 2 weeks to get ready for Florida. I'm like, all right, let's see what we can do.
Yeah, I didn't give you a lot of time.
It literally was a week and a half. You're like, so I need to look good for the beach in Florida 2 weeks before going.
Yeah, all right. Is that unrealistic? Am I too ambitious?
Like, I'll try to work my magic, but I can't promise anything.
Yeah. So he's not traveling with you, but you've reunited with him.
I've reunited with him and yeah, we're super close. Like me and my brother, as you know, we're super close. We have a really special bond. I have a special bond with both my siblings, to be honest, my brother and sister. I'm really lucky and grateful in that way. I can say that they're both my best friends. We're all different, but we share a lot of the same interests and, we love people, we love entertaining. So it's we're close, but not in a unhealthy codependent way. And it's different for every family dynamic's different. And some siblings talk, some don't, some family members don't talk,
and for different reasons. Sometimes there's a reason for why you don't communicate with your family members. And sometimes there's just no reason, it's not that kind of tight-knit family.
Exactly. And, even though we're super close, like my brother, sister, and I, we still have our moments and flare ups. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, we've had our blowouts and, where we've responded in maybe not the most mature ways, but then we always try to hash it out and communicate and,
Yeah. My family is very, I was going to say spread out, but my immediate family is what makes it spread out because my parents, who both worked in aviation, moved to the north. So it's like dad's family, mom's family, and then us were the outliers. So anytime that we would travel for holidays or for any sort of break that we had in our schedule, I always hated it because you don't see these people every day. And so it's a lot of the same, like, so how many girlfriends you got now? And what kind of grades are you getting in school? And it's just very shallow conversation. And you were this tall last time I saw you. And like, what else are you going to say? Like, and I understand that they're doing their best, but that's why I say that sometimes families just aren't close for no other reason except you're not geographically close. And that's okay. You're
There's
still
so many
family.
exactly. There's honestly so many reasons why sometimes families aren't so close knit and it's complex, and sometimes it can just be personality differences, lifestyle differences,
Mm-hmm.
again, geographical differences. So
Mm-hmm.
that's okay.
It is okay. But I guess certain people would feel that obligation to maintain these relationships, even if it's forced and even if it's a bit unnatural, that people feel obligated to show up for family. Even if they don't show up for them, people have different relationships with that word family.
I think so. And actually, there's one statement that I don't agree with that I feel like I hear it a lot, though, is like, family is everything, your blood, your family. I don't agree with that, as in, like, do anything for your family. And it depends on the situation, though. But sometimes people come from families that are dysfunctional and abusive. And sometimes it's not they don't feel safe to be able to express themselves. So I don't think that family is everything for everyone. Maybe it is for some people, but for some people friends can be a form of family for them. You know what I mean?
It's the family that you choose.
It's the family that you choose, and sometimes you do have to have boundaries with certain family members, and that's what we're going to be talking all about in today's episode.
Today's episode is all about boundaries and communication,
Yeah, so
which family triggers a lot of feelings of disrespected boundaries and miscommunication. So,
yes, for some people, yes. We're going to be talking all about, how to communicate and set healthy boundaries with our family members, friends at work and relationships, and just really all across the board, because our personal boundaries aren't as obvious as a fence or a no trespassing sign. And oftentimes it's hard for us to really get clear on what our personal boundaries are. The word boundary in itself can be a bit misleading because it conveys the idea that we're keeping ourselves separate when in fact they provide healthy rules for navigating through all of our relationships. And this isn't something that we've been taught in school. And although it can be challenging to navigate, and setting them and communicating them is essential for our health, well-being, and safety. So we hope in this episode to uncover and unlearn what we've been taught about having boundaries, how to say no, how to safeguard your space and honor your needs while still maintaining healthy connections and relationships.
yeah. And unlearning not just what we've been taught about having boundaries, but what we've taught ourselves just as defense mechanisms. Like, I know that there's a lot of things that I just keep to myself privately because it would feel like crossing my own personal boundaries if someone were to comment on something that is so private or protective to me.
Right.
So, I'd rather just not talk about that. I'd rather not talk about this thing at work or this thing in my personal life because I don't want my family or friends commenting on it. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. Maybe that's worth unlearning. Maybe there's a way that I can merge the two worlds because I tend to compartmentalize a lot of aspects of my life to protect my boundaries. And maybe that's not the best way to go about it.
Yeah. And I mean, in today's episode, John Moore, I'm sure will be able to definitely help us with that and probably teach us and guide us through how we can integrate healthy boundaries. Because again, like you were saying, you tend to compartmentalize, and that could be for various reasons. And maybe John can kind of shed some light on how to integrate it more in a, not saying it's an unhealthy way, but so it flows with more ease for you. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Because it works for me, but maybe I'm just telling myself that it's working for me. Maybe I need to be a little bit more whole
and integrated.
Yeah. And is there anything that you want to unlearn or things that you want to ask John about?
So I've done a lot of boundary work. I mean, I think that boundary and communication, it's interesting that this is the episode because this is the two things I'd been working a lot on in the last 3 years through various types of healing modalities and therapy, because it was one area that I really, really struggled with. And it showed up all across the board for me: work, relationships, family, the inability to say no. And it's still hard for me, but I'm much more confident and assertive in when I do set boundaries, and I don't feel like I'm overextending myself and not taking care of my own needs. So what do I want to ask John today? What we really wanted to touch on was how we can be more flexible with our boundaries, because I tend to be sometimes kind of black and white with my thinking. And
it's gray. It's more gray.
I got to be in the gray zone, baby. Like I got to get into the gray zone, because sometimes I can be like, this is the boundary I'm setting and it will not change. And that's not true though, because I've shifted my boundaries over time with certain different aspects of my life. So moving away from black and white thinking, more into the gray zone when it comes to boundary setting.
Yeah. And there's also room for forgiveness. There's room for growth. The person that you have the boundaries against, they can come around and you can come around to them. I tend to be a little too empathetic, and I've seen people cut off, or people cut other people off. And I always feel bad for both parties involved. I don't think it really solves anything. So I want to talk to John about that, about knowing when it is appropriate to cut communication and when to try to keep the peace, because I understand that there are some very toxic exceptions where it's not even worthwhile to keep the peace.
For sure.
But it just, whenever I see anyone cut off or anyone feel betrayed, it just makes me hurt for both parties involved.
I get that.
Yeah.
Well, we have an interesting episode coming up, that's for sure.
We do. And like we keep teasing, we have shamanic practitioner, teacher, coach, and the host of the Speaking Spirit podcast. His name is John Moore, and he's coming to the conversation from South Portland, Maine. And he's next up on the Regeneration Show.
You're listening to The Regeneration Show with Andrew St. Germain and Stephanie Katona. Pass it on, theregenerationshow.com.
So you're listening to The Regeneration Show. I'm Andrew St. Germain.
And I'm Stephanie Katona. And now we welcome our next guest on the show, John Moore, host of John Moore's Speaking Spirit podcast. He is a shamanic practitioner, teacher, and coach who focuses on helping others achieve a state of flow and ease in life. He has practiced many spiritual and healing modalities, including Tantric Buddhism, Reiki, mindfulness meditation, Qigong, and shamanism. He joins us today from South Portland, Maine. John, welcome to the Regeneration Show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
I was telling Andrew how excited I was to have you on, and I was just actually reviewing your list of podcast episodes before, and I was like, yep, I'll be listening to that. I'll be listening to that.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Friends in the podcast sphere.
Right.
Yeah, and I was excited because I noticed that I was on your website and just, researching you a little bit and all your work around shamanism and dream work. And I was like, Andrew, what a great guest to bring on the show.
Gosh, well, thank you. That's a lot to live up to, I guess.
What's dream work?
Well, I actually do a weekly radio spot up here in Maine where I interpret the dreams of callers. People call into the radio station, and I do dream interpretation. It happens to be a specialty of mine in the shamanic world. So it was something that I kind of fell into, and this radio show up here said, would you allow us to have our callers come in with dreams? And sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're not so funny. And so I try to help people sort them out and figure out if there's something they need to pay attention to in their life, which is frequently the case with dreams.
Yeah, dreams are so mysterious. And I haven't had any weird ones recently, so don't worry. I'm not going to spring any dream analysis on you.
No worries.
But so often I will dream, I'll Google the dream analysis, and Google just gives me a big question mark. Like, no one's ever had that dream before. Sorry, can't help you.
Completely.
I need to be calling into your local radio station whenever I have a bad dream.
Right.
But I was telling Stephanie a couple of weeks ago, I was hearing knocks in my sleep, and I thought that there were actual knocks at the door. So I got up and I would check the door, and there was no one there, and I went back to sleep. And then I was woken up by knocks again. And it was so realistic and loud. And I Googled that, and that didn't have a question mark. It told me that was called exploding head syndrome. Have you heard of such a thing?
Exploding head syndrome. No, I haven't heard
Doesn't
that.
that sound like such an extreme thing for something
Sounds
so
terrible.
minor?
Right. Hearing knocks. I mean, I definitely have worked with people who are hearing sounds frequently in their home or, in their dreams or that sort of thing. But I will have to Google exploding head syndrome after this. That's a first for me for sure.
Awesome. So, okay, guys. So let's get into it. So my first question for you, John, is what inspired you to embark on this journey and be a guide for others through their healing process with a strong focus on adverse childhood experiences and trauma?
Right. So I had adverse childhood experiences and trauma. I grew up in a household that was, there was alcoholism, there was domestic violence, there was child abuse, there were all kinds of not so great childhood experiences. And, like a lot of people, I sort of repressed that for as long as I could, which is not long. Like that stuff creeps up on you, pops out when you least expect it. It manifests as depression. It manifests as all kinds of things, eating disorders, chemical dependency, you name it. And so for me, I went through a crisis when I was in my early 40s, and I've always been a spiritual person. I've trained martial arts my whole life. I've practiced Qigong and Tantric Buddhism and all kinds of stuff. And I just got a very clear message one day when I was meditating. I said, you need to go learn shamanism. And I was like, I know nothing about shamanism. How's that going to work? I live in Maine. I don't live in Peru or Siberia or Mongolia. How on earth am I going to learn shamanism? And I used the ancient shamanic tool of Google and found my teacher. And that happens to be some amazing teachers who live up in this area. Is a huge, for such a small state with a tiny population, there's a huge shamanic community here. And it was, I went to it only for myself. I went into it. I'm not going to work with anybody else. I'm not interested in that. I only want to go through my own healing. I only want to work on myself. The universe had other plans for me. And I've always loved teaching. That's the other part of it, from teaching martial arts. And I've taught in the technology sector. I've taught adult learners in the technology sector. And so it's been sort of a natural progression for me. I've gone through about as much training as I can possibly cram in the in my lifetime. I mean, I'm always looking for more, but I'm, lucky to be one of 8 people that my teacher chose to pass on. She's retiring at the end of this year. She's in a phase of her life where she is an elder, and she is passing the torch to 8 people. And I'm extremely lucky, extremely gifted to be one of those people, and very happy about that.
That's incredible. And I mean, you've gone through the trenches yourself and with all your experiences. So, I mean, it makes sense that you would only want to help and be a guide for others through their healing journey, for others that have experienced these adverse childhood experiences, right?
Absolutely. And there's a saying in shamanism that your wound becomes medicine, right? So when you heal yourself, and in the beginning of my practice, 100% of my clients came to me with trauma. For the longest, maybe a couple of years, everybody who came to me with trauma. And, it is a widespread thing. We don't even know how many people are suffering from PTSD or CPTSD. And, there is a wound resonance, meaning I've gone through the same thing. I've done a lot of work to not have symptoms of the problems that I had from that. And people can be, sort of attracted to that in a way where, like, oh, here's somebody who may have something to offer, who's been through this, who understands. And that part of the work is extremely rewarding for me when I can, tell people, look, I'm not special. I've been living symptom free for a really long time, and there's nothing special about me. I'm not smarter than you are. I wasn't born gifted. I'm not wealthy. I don't have any of these things. So if I can do it, you can do it. And that's the message really when I can give people hope about that, like that to me is it's an emotional topic for me because it's just beautiful. And it's a way that I can give back. And I love that.
I love that. And honestly, I'm so fascinated by this whole mind body connection and just how because I've done quite a bit of work on spiritual work on my healing on myself the last 3 years, and just how much we store in our bodies and how trauma, how it shows up in our bodies, and just doing all this work with like osteopathy and Reiki. And it's just so interesting, like all the how really complex and how layered it is,
Yeah, and layered is a great word. It's a word that I use all the time to describe it. And there's no separation between the layers, right? You can't point to the place where our mind and body stop. Like, this is the end of my body and the beginning of my mind. They overlap, they interact, they interpenetrate. We can't really separate them out. So you're absolutely right. Trauma is stored in the body. It's stored on a spiritual level. It's stored, we experience it in the mind and the emotions. And so, in my world, it's a really beautiful thing to take a multifaceted approach to healing trauma. I'm for everything. Do everything you possibly can, take care of your body, take care of your mind, take care of your spirit.
I agree. I look at it like hitting it from 3 different angles: energetically, on a cerebral level, and then on a somatic body level, like and kind of like, I feel like sometimes you need more of like the talk therapy to work through something. And other times it's more of somatic work. Sometimes it's more of like Reiki or energetic work. So it's really interesting how it all just kind of unfolds. It's not just linear, it's just constantly.
Nothing in life is linear.
No, nope. Yeah. I've learned that.
Right.
So today we're going to be talking all about boundaries and communication. So my question around that was, understanding and setting boundaries is difficult for a lot of people. I think because growing up, we've been taught to be kind, to be generous, thoughtful, and to help those in need. And the messages we've received may conflict with our own needs and well-being. And essentially, I think we're conditioned to self-abandon in many ways. So what are the different types of boundaries one can have, and how can we shift this perception of them given all the messages that we've picked up along the way? I know that's a very big question to
yeah, it's answer. A big question. It's a big question, but yeah, for sure. So I like to talk about what healthy boundaries are, and what healthy boundaries are mean different things for different people, right? So there are things that I might be comfortable with accepting that you're not comfortable with accepting. And I might have flexible boundaries in some situations and really rigid boundaries in other situations. And really, you're absolutely right. We're socialized. And I taught self-defense for a really long time. And I taught people how to, how criminals use the way we're socialized to take advantage of people sometimes, right? Because we don't want to seem like a jerk. We don't want to say no when somebody asks us something, even if it violates a boundary of ours. So really, really, the first step is getting clear on what your boundaries are. Recognize what makes you uncomfortable, what triggers you, what things you're not willing to accept. And the way I like to look at it is, if I wouldn't allow a stranger, just talking about conversation, how people talk to me, if I wouldn't accept a stranger talking to me in a certain way, and this is my own value, I'm not going to let somebody who is supposedly a loved one talk to me in that way, right? I'm not going to let a loved one speak to me in ways that are disrespectful, because they should be showing me love. And that's not to say that they have to accept my behavior or tell me when something is, when I've done something that hurts them or done something that they wish I'd done differently. That's different than dumping anger, dumping emotion on me, or trying to hook me into some sort of emotional reaction. And it's really, really critical for our own health. And we're just talking about how our mind, body, and spirit all act together. When our mental health gets interrupted, it really can affect our body. We can get sick from that. We can have, obviously spiritual repercussions from that as well. And so it's really, really important. Boundaries are incredibly important. And it doesn't mean you necessarily push everybody away. It's about having healthy boundaries. It's about recognizing what's okay for you and what's not okay for you.
Right. And I think oftentimes when we think of setting boundaries, we think of setting them with work and relationships, but not with family members. And I think, and this is the tricky part, I think, because like family boundaries really does actually set the tone for how we view relationships of all kinds throughout our lives. So if we don't have, and the thing is, sometimes we come from families that can have a dysfunctional enmeshment, or there's blurred lines, there is no boundaries. So I feel like people that come from that environment have a harder time setting boundaries in all different areas of their lives.
Yeah, I mean that's especially true in unhealthy family dynamics like the ones I grew up in, where the expectation is that you could be the victim, like you're either going to victimize somebody else or you're going to be the victim of something. And I have a really short but I think great story about setting boundaries with family. I have children of my own. I have twin daughters, and when they were little, I worked really hard around with them to not have them go through some of the same things that I did, and to be able to set boundaries even with adults, which sometimes got them into trouble, like with principals in their
right.
But I did the thing that a lot of parents do, and I said something to my daughter one time that I had promised myself earlier I would never say, and it was my dad's voice coming out of my mouth. I got frustrated with something my daughter was doing. She was about 4 years old, and I said, "What is wrong with you?" And that is not an okay thing for me to say. And she looked me right square in the eye. I'm so proud of her. She looked me right square in the eye. She said, "There is nothing wrong with me." I looked back and I go, "You are absolutely 100% right. You are absolutely correct. There is nothing wrong with you. I shouldn't have said that. And if I ever say that again, you have my permission to call me on it." And, it's a way, it's one of the ways that I can operate in the world is through my children, by teaching them that it's okay to have healthy boundaries, even with adults when you're a child, right? Because how many children don't learn healthy boundaries because their parents don't teach that to them, and they can be obviously easily victimized and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I mean, you're right. With family members, it can be really hard because there's almost a biological, or not even almost, there is a biological impetus for us to keep in contact with these family members, right? We're evolved for these tight-knit family groups. It's a survival mechanism for us. And so anything that threatens that feels like an existential threat to us. But I can tell you, having cut off a family member here or there, those were some of the best decisions I've ever made in my life for my own personal health.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like there's times where we do need to pull ourselves away from certain like family members and set those boundaries. And just because if we're working through something that's really challenging, like doing some inner work that's challenging, we feel like we just can't be in the same space or be in contact with them at the time. But then you can revisit it, later and reconnect. But
if we're cognizant, yeah, that everyone has their own baggage and their own trauma, and we try to look at everyone through an empathetic lens or through a generous lens, when do we know if it's worthwhile to strategize ways to peacefully coexist with these disrespectful communicators, and when it's time to just cut them off entirely?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely can be extremely challenging, and really self-awareness is the most important part of that, right? So for me, it did take me a lot to cut off certain family members. Like, they were extremely disrespectful and trying to get their hooks into me every single time I saw them. And, I'm like, I'm just getting unhealthier and unhealthier every time I interact with this person. This is a horrible situation. This is a horrible situation for me. And so I have to take care of myself. And I think I might be misquoting and I might be misattributing, but I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, if your circle of compassion, if your circle of empathy does not include yourself, then it is incomplete. Right. And so we should not, it's good to be compassionate. It's good to be empathetic. It's good to show people the respect that you would want, but it's also okay to show yourself the respect that you want. It's so important. We can be our own worst critic. We can be our own, I work with a lot of clients and I'm like, the things that you're saying to yourself in your head, would you allow somebody else to talk to you like that? And they'll tell me, no. I'm like, well, why would you talk to yourself like that? So we have to exercise self-compassion, and it's the whole maybe an overused metaphor, but it's the whole airplane mask thing, right? If you're in an airplane and you don't put your own mask on first, you can't help somebody else, right? You're not going to have it within you. So if you're not showing yourself compassion and taking care of yourself and being aware of what's going on with you, but I think it really does start with self-awareness. What's happening to me emotionally, what's happening to me physically when I'm with these people. We all have had people in our lives that just drain the energy out of us when we're in the same room with them.
Yeah.
And you go into the room and you're like, you're not going to get to me. You're not going to get to me. And then they say the thing and you're like, you got to me.
Yeah. No, I've been there. I've been there so many times where I'm like strategizing. Okay, if this person does this, how am I going to react? And then I get there and I'm a 12-year-old child again. I forgot everything that I had planned.
I think we all experience that. And that all ties into, knowing your triggers and like, how do we anticipate it when we're in a room with these family members or people that trigger us. And it's hard in the heat of the moment though, not to go on autopilot mode, but that's where the whole self-awareness piece comes in. Right. Something I've been working on for a while, but every now and then we slip up.
Right. Our work is never done. And, you mentioned triggers. Like the thing with triggering is it's not conscious. Like when you're triggered, something just goes and you're in that mode. It's like turning a switch and you step into a different personality all of a sudden.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually. It's like all of a sudden your body, it's like a physiological rush that goes through the entire body. I can just go back in time and remember moments where that would happen when I wasn't aware. So how can we communicate and set clear boundaries with family members? Like, can you give some practical examples on how to set a clear boundary? Say you're invited to something or you want to decline an invitation for
or you don't want to decline an invitation, but
you don't want to decline, but you have certain boundaries that you want to set.
Right. So, I think every situation is a little bit different, but I think the key is to, you can be assertive without, like, a lot of people confuse assertiveness with rudeness, right? And assertiveness is just plainly stating my boundaries. Listen, I can show up to this party, but I can only stay till 9. Yeah. And you don't have to apologize. You don't have to explain. It's none of you have to take on a little bit of the opinion that it's nobody's business but yours what your boundaries are, or you can explain them to people, certainly, if they but you don't have to explain them to anybody. You have every right to set whatever boundaries those are. Or I'm gonna come here, but if this person shows up, I'm going to leave early because they're very triggering for me. And you just say, I'm gonna show up, but I might not be able to stay the whole time. And you can assert that as a boundary without going over the deep end. So I think what happens for a lot of people when they first start to state boundaries is that emotion comes up again, and then it becomes this conflict with people, right? Where I found, and actually my mom is really great at this. As a matter of fact, she'll set boundaries with me or other members of my family. She's like, well, we'll come from 6 to 8, and she'll literally be out the door at 8 o'clock. No explanation, no, and nobody should be asking you for that, right? So the other part of that is recognizing that if people are stepping over your boundaries, they're not showing you the love, the compassion, the empathy, the respect that every human being deserves. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your relationship is to anybody. You deserve that. You just by virtue of being alive and being a human being, you have every right to take care of yourself.
I think, and I think that sometimes we feel the need to over-explain ourselves, why we're leaving at 8 or why, and I think that's what gets us into trouble, is rather than just stating it, but it's challenging, right?
Or you leave because someone that you would rather not associate with has arrived. And I've definitely been that person where, like, when they get here, I'm leaving, but now that's a disservice. But that's a disservice for me because I'd rather stay, but this person makes it impossible for me. It's not a case of winners or losers, but in that sense, they're winning against me.
So I get that feeling, right? So I, even very recently, I had a situation where I was part of something that a very toxic ex was a part of, and I had to step away because she would not. There was no way she was going to step away. And even though I feel like I was losing out on something, I did it for the greater good, because it wasn't for me to drag my conflict with this person into everybody else's life. Right. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of a missing out thing. And as a toxic person, she kind of, I hate to use the word won,
Yeah,
but
me too.
she got the better end of the deal with that, because she was just like, well, I'm going to that, and doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to show up. And I'm like, well, if I show up, there's going to be a conflict, and that's not good for anybody. So even though I'm going to miss out, but that's my choice. Ultimately, I made a choice to do that. There's always a trade when we make choices, right? There's always good and, or maybe not so good, but a whole lot worse. And so that's a choice that I made, that I wasn't going to be, and that was about setting a boundary for me, that I wasn't going to be in the same physical space with this person. And that was an important boundary. And for me to do that, I had to do something, I had to do something else, which was leave the space.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, like, again, you have to do what's right for you. I've done that times where I'll just leave something earlier. I just won't show up to the event just because I know that I can't be in that space. It'll cause too much emotional turmoil for me. So I'd rather I don't know if that's good, but I would just rather not engage.
I think it's fine to a point, being in sort of the same situation. I think it's fine to a point unless it starts to really interfere with your life. We're like, okay, I can never do this again, or I can never see these people again, or I can never do this. Then it's really imposing upon your life, and you might have to make, it's really up to you what choices you want to make, but you might have to make different choices. But again, it starts with that self-awareness. You check in and say, really, how is this affecting me? How is this person's behavior affecting me? How are my choices affecting me and affecting my life? And you can choose to make different choices. That's the other thing, is that that people don't get, is you can set a boundary and then you can change your mind about the boundary later on. Right. So that's fine too. Or something might have been flexible for a while, and now you're like, nope, I realized that that's not okay, and I'm setting a new boundary. You have every right to do that as well.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about, is that ability to be flexible with our boundaries, and we can change them over time. Like, for example, if at this point in my journey and this juncture of what I'm going through right now, this is the boundary I need to set for me, because emotionally this is what I'm going through. But later on, maybe in 3 months after I've, gone through what I've gone through, I can be a little more flexible with that boundary, because I can, show up differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's not, I think a lot of people have this unspoken rule that once I set a boundary down, it's set in stone and I can't change it. So if I decide I'm not going to be part of, this group of people anymore, because you might go back to that group of people in a month or a year or 10 years, who knows, right? After you've done some self-work, after it's less triggering for you.
Right.
And that's fine. That's fine too.
You say that it may seem like a radical position, but you have the right to choose how people communicate with you. But another thing that I took away from your article is you have the right to remain silent. Like, I haven't heard that used in that same context, but sometimes you don't have to say anything. We feel the obligation to, but you have the right to just walk away.
Yeah, we are often put in a place where we feel like we have to explain ourselves. I'm walking away because, or this is my boundary because. And then, like, sometimes that's fine if that's your choice to do that. But sometimes that opens the door and it sort of looks like your boundary is up for debate. And it might be, or it might not be. And if your boundary is not up for debate, sometimes the easiest way to handle that is just not to explain it. I'm not doing this, or it's not okay to talk to me like that. Just leave it. And if somebody asks why, you can just say, well, I've stated what's okay and what's not. And that's it. You're under no obligation to talk anymore about it, to explain yourself. And nobody is. Right. So that can be an area where boundaries can get really challenging And people will put, there are lots of people who will push boundaries. Like I said, I have children. That's their job, right? Is to push boundaries. And now they're
See what they can get.
right. Now they're teenagers. They're starting to drive very soon. So there's all about pushing boundaries, but then if you have a boundary that you don't want to be flexible about, then we can feel this social pressure to move it or to do something we don't want to do, or to accept behavior where we really didn't want to accept. Well, this should be okay because X, Y, Z. Then you get into a debate about your boundaries, and you don't need to do that. There's no reason for that.
Yeah, I used to have a pretty tough time. Something I'd been working on the last 3 years was tough time setting a clear boundary. I feel like before I used to do that whole, what you were saying, explain myself, and then people would be like, they would jump on that, right? And then kind of try to change my mind. And then I would feel resentful and go through this whole emotional experience, right? So, I mean, now it's much different because of all the work I've done. But before, that was something I totally understand, that whole over explaining. And yeah.
I have a good friend, and this might sound a little bit harsh, but he's in a position where time is extremely valuable, right? And whose isn't? But if somebody came to him and had something to say, and they said something and then was going on and on and on about it, he would just look at them and say, I got it. And he would turn around and walk away. Right. Because at that point, he had already gotten the message, and their further continuing was just impinging upon him or trying to drop. Frequently, these boundary crossings are, I want you to feel a certain way, right? I want you to feel the anger that I'm feeling, or I want you to feel upset that you hurt me, or I want you to, I want you to feel a certain way. And that's what was going on for him, where people were like, this happened to me and this happened to me. He's like, okay, I got that. And they were like, well, and they would just keep going, and he would say, I got it. And he would turn around and walk away, because at that point, there's this emotional dumping going on. Right. And people love, we love, one of my least favorite words is the word commiserate, which means let's be miserable together. Right.
Yeah.
That's different than empathy. It's different than holding space for somebody, which is something that I do a lot with clients and people that I work with, is to hold space when somebody is going through a moment of suffering. That doesn't mean I take their suffering on. I can see, I can be empathetic without having to go down that, being dragged down into that world, into that rabbit hole.
I'm very jealous of communicators like your friend who are very succinct. I don't have that skill. But Stephanie mentioned osteopathy.
Yeah, the same the osteopath that we were both seeing.
Yeah. And he, just by looking at my back, I was so confused. I'm like, you can tell this from my back? He's like, people lean on you too much. You don't lean on anyone else enough. And I think I have empathy to not a dangerous degree. That's like exploding head syndrome. Very dramatic.
Very dramatic.
But I think I need to set clearer boundaries on my empathy, because it's bordering on commiserating.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is, there are a lot of people that describe themselves as empaths, right? Meaning they take everything in like a sponge, and they frequently have a hard time distinguishing what's theirs and what isn't theirs to take on. And even trained therapists get something called compassion fatigue, right? Where they've been so compassionate over time, they just sort of like run out of steam, and they run out of emotional steam. And, they have tools for dealing with that. Frequently it's a reset or taking time away from their practice or that sort of thing. But us normal lay folk don't necessarily always have tools to do that. Right. And there are lots of us that people, if you're the kind of person who is very empathetic, people pick up on that even subconsciously, right? Yeah. They attach, they're like, oh, here's somebody who can, I want people to feel like I feel.
It's weird. It's like an energetic, they can feel that you're an empathetic person, and they just latch on. It's super, yeah. It's super interesting.
Very latchy. Yes.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So the body work stuff. Me and Andrew went to the same osteopath, and he would be like, because you do, I mean, the shamanic work that you do is similar, right? You do body work essentially too, right?
I don't do body work.
Oh, it's not body work.
Yeah.
See, I don't know much about obviously I need to read more up on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there may be people who are doing body work who are shamanic. It's not something I do. I do. We deal with sort of the spiritual aspects of healing. So when we talk about people exist on this continuum of mind, body, spirit, well, even all of those are continuum among themselves. So even our mind is a huge continuum of things, and our spirit is a big continuum of things as well. And so there's a few layers of that I deal with, and people who sort of do the same things that I do deal with. And that shamanically, the people have sort of different practices all over the world. There's some things that are in common, but they're, shamanism's been around for, we don't know, maybe a couple 100,000 years, and in every culture in the world. So there's all of these cultural overlays on top of it. So there may be people who are doing body work, and there may be people who do sound healing, or all kinds of different modalities within the scope of shamanism.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's the one area I wasn't too familiar with, as I know a lot about Reiki and osteopathy and acupuncture, but shamanism is not something. But good to know. I might be reaching out to you.
Feel free.
Yeah. So last question is, what kind of alternative healing, or I guess I'll use the word alternative healing, would you recommend for someone who is struggling with boundaries and communication? Because there's so many different modalities. And I know, like we talked about this, it can be talk therapy, it can be Reiki, it can be shamanism. So what would you recommend for someone who's dealing with that specific issues around communication?
Yeah. So, I mean, I obviously am a big fan of shamanism, and I think shamanism is a perfectly wonderful thing for people who may have some issues from trauma or something that are involved with their boundaries. I also love talk therapy. I think that is a great thing. And there are modes of talk therapy. There are things that I like. I'm very Jungian, and and this is just my opinion, but I like things like internal family systems, and things that are very archetypal and psychoanalytic, because it gets to this like really deep part of us that, or the different parts of us that are, what happens when I walk into this situation and I feel like I'm a 12-year-old all over again. I'm stepping into this sub-personality, this sub-part of myself. And so there are talk therapies that are really good at dealing with that. So, based on some Jungian principles that I really like as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to open up that conversation for different healing modalities that you can start diving into.
We're about to run out of time, so I'll open the floor to you if there's anything that we haven't addressed that you'd like to address.
I just really, my message, I guess, is that it's really important, just repeating, it's really the self-awareness and self-empowerment are really, really important. And not just for our happiness, which our happiness is important enough as it is, but again, our mental health and our physical health and our spiritual health are all intimately linked. And it starts with self-awareness and knowing what's going on with you. If you're not aware of something, you can't really change it. You can't really do anything about it. So that's my biggest recommendation, is to find ways to be more self-aware, pay attention to what's going on with you.
Well, thank you, John. You are a perfect talk show guest.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. This was a really dynamic and interesting and insightful conversation. Maybe
we can have you back sometime.
I would love that. Absolutely.
And what's the name of that radio station that I call into with my dream?
It's called The Q, WJBQ, and
WJBQ in Maine.
Up here in Portland, Maine. Yeah.
All right. Well, expect a call soon.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us,
John.
You're so welcome.
All right. You take care there.
Take care.
Too.
Our thanks to John Moore, shamanic practitioner, teacher, coach, and the host of John Moore's Speaking Spirit podcast. He joined us on the Regeneration Show from South Portland, Maine.
You're listening to the Regeneration Show with Andrew St. Germain and Stephanie Katona. Pass it on. TheRegenerationshow.com.
So you're listening to the Regeneration Show. I'm Andrew St. Germain.
And I'm Stephanie Katona.
He was
awesome.
He was the perfect talk show guest.
This is the guest. This is the talk show guest that we need.
This is exactly.
I mean, he runs a podcast too. So I feel like naturally you have to have that ability to just kind of be on the fly, you know?
Yeah. So before we go, Stephanie, what would you say your takeaway has been from today's episode?
So my takeaway for sure had been the whole thing probably the same as you. Well, I don't know if it's the same thing as you, but basically when we're setting a boundaries that we don't need to over explain ourselves, because that was something I used to try to do, is explain why I'm setting this boundary and just actually leaving it as it is. So there's no room for negotiation, I guess.
We're both talkers. We feel the need to explain everything, but
I know.
sometimes things don't need explanation.
Oh, welcome to my world. Overanalyze, worry, war. Like these are the things like I just wish I'm like, can you just like I don't know how to just like take it away. I just overthink, overanalyze. It's a problem.
Yeah.
So for me, that's like a chronic thing that I just feel the need to over explain everything. And it's just like sometimes you don't need to over explain, especially when it comes to a boundary, because like there is no room for negotiation and it's no one's business to kind of ask why you're setting this boundary. So that's what I unlearned about that. And I also unlearned about the whole thing about changing your boundaries can change over the course of your life. Like, for example, if you're doing some deep healing right now, 3 months later, you might come back to that person and be like, I mean, I don't know if you're directly going to be like, hey, so my boundary has now changed. I have now shifted and we're more flexible now, but I don't think it needs to be, that direct, but you can kind of just make it known.
You've already gone back to the bad habit of over explaining.
Right? Yeah. Virgo, classic Virgo.
Yeah. You don't have to explain it. Just
do it.
Just come back around. Yeah. Just by action.
Exactly.
A little conversation, a little more action, please.
Yes.
What I unlearned, the things that I wrote down and really highlighted from our conversation were: you have the right to choose how people communicate with you. That is a big one. You have the right to remain silent. We talked about that in the episode. You have the right to set the terms under which you will communicate, and do not apologize for setting a boundary. I think that's a big one. I think we will put our foot down in the moment, and then later on we'll send a text or we'll call or we'll say, hey, sorry about that was a little bit harsh. No, if it felt necessary in the moment, it was necessary, and you don't have to apologize for it.
Yep, I agree. I 100% agree.
So that's
what we've unlearned.
That was our boundaries and communication show. And as always, you can shout out what topics you want us to address next by going to the regenerationshow.com. And cover art for the Regeneration Show is by Antonella Giordano, photography by Alexandria Yar, featuring narration by Andrea Roos.
Bye.
Bye. Adios.
Adios. Oh, wait, we forgot. We were supposed to do that. Remember?
Right.
Our greetings in every country that I'm in. Now that we're in Mexico, I need to adios, and hola.
Thanks for listening.
Join Andrew and Stephanie for the next Regeneration Show and pass it on. TheRegenerationshow.com.